Welcome everybody to our International Compliance Quarterly Update. Our agenda for today, we'll do a quick introduction and then we will look at news stories from around the globe, including Europe, Asia, the US and Canada, and then we'll wrap up at the end and just go through a few ways that Valpak can be of assistance in dealing with your compliance outside of the UK. So I'm joined this morning by my colleague Roxana, and we are part of the international compliance team here at Valpak, and it's our job to help companies such as yourselves comply with legislation outside of the UK. Now, there's been lots going on over the past few months, and I think to start with, Roxana, you're going to go through some new legislation that's coming in Europe.
Yes, hi everyone. We are going to start with the market surveillance regulation, which is going to come into force in July 2021 in Europe, obviously. It is to ensure that online retailers are going to be just as regulated as the ones who've got physical presence in EU member states. It is going to apply to all laws on packaging waste, and batteries, for online platforms such as Amazon and eBay as well. Right now, these online retailers are just called as fulfillment services rather than economic operators, and that is the biggest change coming in 2021. France has already taken steps to tackle compliance-free riding in January 2019, so the EU is just trying to catch up with their member states.
Yeah, and it will also make sure that companies placing products on all of these markets will be obligated and they'll need to ensure that they are complying correctly with the requirements of the legislation, regardless of whether or not they have a presence in the country, like you said, Roxy. So it will impact a great number of companies, I feel, and more companies will potentially be obligated.
Definitely, and it's just going to be a bigger overview for the entire continent rather than just each country now.
Yeah, that's right.
But not only the EU as an organisation is placing in new laws, but also member states. So we can see that in Germany, they're tackling plastic waste, thinking about banning plastic waste with lighter plastic carrier bags at retailers' checkouts, but they are not going to ban the vegetable and fruit packaging, the plastic bags which you put your fruit in, because they are afraid that that would lead to more food waste, which is obviously you tackle one problem, but then you put another one. This is set to take effect in 2020, so just before the market surveillance regulation, and the penalties can go up to 100,000 euros. And in addition to Germany, it's also the UK, or well, England, who has confirmed that are going to ban certain plastic items like straws or cotton buds from April 2020, so that's around the time when Germany is banning it as well. But it is obviously going to have exemptions for people who actually need straws, medical reasons.
Yeah, and it also brings us nicely in line with the EU Single-Use Plastics Directive as well, which not only looks at things like plastic straws, drink stirrers and cotton buds, but even extends out to things like balloon sticks, cutlery, plastic plates, kind of those items that you perhaps don't necessarily think of in terms of when we're throwing them away, add to that the problem that is kind of plastic waste, and it's quite a hot topic at the moment as well. We're also seeing plans in Ireland. The Republic of Ireland's Environment Minister has announced recently that they will be bringing forward a number of radical actions to try and reduce waste. So earlier on in August, the Irish government released their climate action plan, and that detailed a number of activities they were going to undertake in order to reduce the amounts of waste that they produce as a country. And those actions include additional bans on single-use plastic plates, cutlery, straws, balloon sticks, polystyrene cups and food containers, and the list goes on and on really. The Irish government now will be taking further steps to discuss these plans with industry representatives, so that includes local authorities, NGOs, and they will be trying to formulate a strategy in order to reach quite ambitious targets that the Climate Action Plan has set out. We're also seeing this week an announcement from the Spanish packaging compliance scheme, Ecoembes, that they will be increasing their fees for 2020. We're looking at around a 25% increase on this year's costs. The reasons for that are mainly being put down to an increased commitment to the environment and recycling. So there's more packaging going onto the Spanish market, there's more recycling that needs doing, and under the actual legislation, the compliance scheme has to make an increased economic commitment to that recycling as well. So there needs to be more funds going into the system, more recycling happening to kind of keep up with the levels of packaging that are going onto the market. We're also seeing activity elsewhere, including the introduction of a potential extended producer responsibility scheme in Georgia. And I know, Roxy, you've been talking to the authorities there, and they seem quite keen to get this implemented and off the ground. Now, the principle of extended producer responsibility in Georgia can actually be found in the Waste Management Code, and that was adopted back in 2014 and kind of sets out the provisions for them to introduce further legislation. And they have been working quite closely with both the EU and the United Nations Development Programme in order to get this legislation in. It's likely that the legislation will be introduced as of December this year or on the 1st, and it will focus on specific waste streams such as packaging, waste electricals, tyres, end-of-life vehicles, oils and batteries and accumulators. We wait to see sort of further information on how the system will work, whether there will be requirements for companies to submit data and pay fees, and as and when we get the updates, we will of course send them through. We're also seeing the introduction of new recycling requirements over in Russia. So the National Resources Ministry has drafted regulations that would require manufacturers to produce 100% recyclable products and packaging, which is quite a feat, really, when at the moment the packaging that is placed onto the Russian market needs to only be between 5 to 35% recyclable. So it's quite an achievement to reach that 100% goal that they've set out. The alternative for companies in Russia is to pay pollution fees or eco fees, as they're sometimes called, in order to offset the requirement to meet that recyclable target. So it'd be interesting to see how that pans out and whether they achieve that goal or not.
Well, and also just to add the price rises that it could incur as well. It's quite crazy that they could go up to 1.5%.
Yeah. So moving a bit further afield now, we're also seeing some activity over in India.
Yes, that is right. But India was set to ban plastics by 2022, but it seems like the Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, is calling a movement to eliminate single-use plastics in India, beginning on the 2nd of October. So that might be a very big change, and there are already companies who are ahead of the game, if I can say it like that, because, for instance, Amazon India has already banned or is looking to ban plastic packaging by 2020, and they're going to use shredded paper instead of bubble wraps. And in addition to Amazon India, there is Flipkart, which is an Indian online store, who are also replacing their bubble wraps with carton waste shredded material, but they are only looking into doing that by 2021, a bit later than Amazon.
Quite a big change in the movement then to getting rid of the plastic packaging that we're all quite familiar with in our deliveries and our parcels. So it'd be interesting to see how what the sort of feedback is they get on the condition of the products being delivered as well. It's also been quite a busy summer over in the US and Canada in terms of legislation, and we're seeing key changes in Ontario with regards to their existing extended producer responsibility system. Ministers Jeff Urick and Steve Clark have announced changes earlier on in August that the Blue Box programme existing in Ontario will extend and transition to include full producer responsibility starting in around 2023, so in a few years' time. But the aim is to promote both innovation and increase recycling rates, so encouraging Ontario's citizens to recycle more products, more packaging, and hopefully to reach a more consistent level of recycling across the province, and introduce a standard list of materials that can be recycled. And I know this is something that we're looking at in the UK as well, is trying to make all areas the same in what we can recycle, so that we're all on the same page and we all understand what we can and can't put in our recycling bins. The main goal is to get the Blue Box programme transitioned in various different phases over a 3-year period, and by the end of 2025, producers will be fully responsible for providing that Blue Box service, financing the collection and recycling of the various materials from residents within the province.
Yes, and not only in Canada can we see EPR laws coming in, but obviously also in the USA. So summer was quite busy there, I have to say, because just in June, Maine, Oregon and Delaware had put in plastic bag bans, and Maine is also hoping to introduce an EPR legislation for packaging soon. Vermont is following suit, and additionally to banning plastic bags, they're also going to ban straws, just like we do it here in the EU and in Europe, and also EPS foam. And in July, we saw Oregon and Delaware banning plastic bags. Connecticut trying it, but for now they're only putting a fee on it, and then hoping that later on they can ban it too. And while what we see in the US is that state by state there are many differences, there is now an initiative to come in with a draft legislation that would be a nationwide EPR legislation all around the US. This would put obligations on producers, even place a national deposit requirement on all beverage containers, a deposit return scheme, basically what we've got, or what we're looking at it here, a carry-out back fee, or plastic ban on certain products. We will see what happens. Yeah.
It'll be very interesting to see, because although producer responsibility legislation is starting to gain momentum in the US and Canada, as you rightly say, Roxy, there's been up to this point no federal or national legislation that unites all the different schemes together. So it'll be interesting to see if they do manage to get that through, and what it will look like when it comes out in terms of a system that does impact on producers and other companies alike. So there has been lots going on, and there's been lots of information that we've passed on to you as part of this session. Europe, as we've seen, is starting to address the problem of free riders and making sure that those companies who should be compliant are, and that they're following the regulations and requirements in all the relevant countries. There is a big focus on online retail, and over the next few years we envisage that quite a few countries will start to maybe adapt their own legislation to make sure that online retailers have to comply in the same way that those companies with a physical presence do. As we've seen, the US and Canada are making further moves to implement producer responsibility laws. They do continue to vary from one state to the next, but we may well see a national programme put in place in the future. Plastic bans are more common and are being implemented across numerous countries and numerous continents. They will often depend on the country and the existing systems in place, but at the moment the focus is very much on single-use plastics, and plastic is the hot topic of the moment, certainly, and everybody is putting in their effort to try and reduce the plastic waste. If you do need any further assistance with your compliance overseas, there are a number of ways that we can help. If you have questions regarding your various obligations, we're more than happy to put assessments together to indicate where you need to focus and perhaps comply with the legislation, as well as taking you through the whole process of getting registered and making your data submissions. We'll continue to do the legislative updates, usually on a quarterly basis, and bring you all the latest news from what's happening, not only within Europe, but also that bit further afield. So thank you, everybody, for listening. We hope you've enjoyed the first quarterly update webinar. If you do have any questions or comments, please feel free to give us a call or drop us an email. We hope you found the session useful, and we'll speak to you again next quarter with some new news.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Bye, everyone.